Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Carrie.
Sonia, we're talking about one of our favorite things, which is a meatless meal.
I think we naturally rotate through meat dishes and vegetarian dishes, but I love having a sort of arsenal of recipes that are vegetarian mains, and we're going to focus specifically on mains that can be made in a sheet pan. Because a sheet pan meal we both love. We're both a huge fan of wherever we can get a little help in the kitchen. And it's just so helpful to have something that you can throw onto one pan, stick in the oven, and mostly call a day. But we want a full disclosure that we're thinking of things that are either largely made on a sheet pan or the main component is made on a sheet pan. Because the other thing you and I've talked a lot about is when we're doing vegetarian meals, especially if we're hosting, we like to have it be more of an experience.
Yes.
Customizable bowls and platters and things where you can add things onto your plate and make it your own. And that's part of the fun. If you aren't used to eating veggie heavy meals, having lots of flavors, colors, textures on the table, I think can be really enticing.
I think most people think of a sheet pan meal as like a super quick, easy thing, which it is. And then if you are entertaining, you can have these really beautiful platters of all these different options. And I think this is something that you and I really excel at, that we've done a lot together. And it's a way to bring everyone to the table, whether you have meat eaters or vegetarians or kids or, just a group of people. You can sort of bring them all to a sheet pan meal. And that can be as simple as a weeknight thing, or it can also be for a party. So let's get into it.
I want to start with something I've been wanting to talk to you about for actually a while, since I first saw it, which I don't know if she invented it, but I feel like she may have. But Giada De Laurentiis had this sheet pan lasagna that went kind of viral.
Ooh.
And
Oh.
it's kind of not exactly what you think. There's loads of versions of sheet pan lasagnas online, but what makes Giada's different is the preparation. Now, having said that, Giada's version includes meat. So it doesn't fall under a category. But I've used many lasagna recipes that have meat, and I just leave out the meat, skip the meat. And I also found a recipe that uses her method with no meat at all. So I still feel like it's worth talking about Giada's inspiration and then how people have sort of evolved that on the internet. So the method is you're still boiling lasagna noodles.
It's regular old lasagna noodles.
Regular old.
Like the curly one.
Like the little frilly on the edges lasagna noodles. Yes. But essentially you're making a sauce that you're going to combine with the noodles. And then you're going to throw those sauce noodles onto your sheet pan. And then you're going to dollop it with a ricotta filling and with cheese. Ooh. It's almost like, in a way, kind of thinking like a pizza, but the lasagna noodles and sauce are the base. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So I think you can make this kind of recipe as easy or as complicated as you want. You could make your own lasagna sheets. You could make your own tomato sauce. But I think the easiest version, probably what I would do, is get some Rayo's tomato sauce.
Yes.
You get that sort of heated in the pan while your pasta is boiling. Maybe you add some garlic and onions to that Rayo's. And also in all these recipes, they suggest like sauteing a little bit of spinach for your ricotta mixture, which I love in a lasagna. So I would kind of have my pans going on, saute or steam your spinach, and then make your ricotta mixture. And actually one of the recipes I found for the vegetarian version, she says you can use either ricotta or whipped cottage cheese, which I just kind of love.
Which, if you want that extra boost of protein, right?
Yeah, and it's a little less fattening, and all you have to do is take your tub of cottage cheese and stick it into a food processor or blender and whip it till it's smooth. And that's a great substitute for ricotta if you're looking for some kind of swap.
Yeah, and I would add baby spinach to that.
Yeah, so that's what you do. You add that.
Make it green.
Exactly. Okay. You take your sauteed spinach, you add it to your ricotta mixture, you add some salt and pepper and herbs, and then your pasta is done cooking. You throw that into your heated sauce. You toss it all together. You put it on your sheet pan. You dollop that ricotta on top. You add some shredded cheese on top, and you stick that into the oven. And you don't have to layer, and you don't have to spend hours doing it. But also, what's so great about this is not the ease of it, but that you're getting so many crispy edges, which I think is the best part of lasagna.
I mean, I love a sheet pan pasta. I love when pasta hits that hot metal and it gets those little crispy edges, and then there's chewy edges. And then if there's extra sauce in one space, it's really soft and creamy. I really love this idea. It's also so fun, right? I think this is also like fun for a dinner party.
Really fun, and then you can just set the whole sheet pan on the table and sort of cut out little slices. Yeah, maybe not a weeknight meal, but still pretty simple, pretty fun, pretty easy, and I'm sure there's ways you could find to, like, simplify it. But Carrie, what are you thinking about?
Well, Sonia, I am thinking about the eggplant parmesan that you and I have made at different retreats together. And we really kind of came up with this on the fly because we were looking for something that was really seasonal, that was healthy, and that we could also make ahead. And so we did these retreats at different times of the year. We did make an eggplant parmesan on a sheet pan. We also did a cauliflower parmesan on a sheet pan. But we're going to talk about the eggplant today. And what I love about the eggplant parmesan is that you can make it with the big globe eggplants that you can also find at the grocery store pretty much all year round. And then if it's the middle of the summer and you find those baby eggplants, you could also use those too. And so if you're working with the big eggplants, you just slice them and you salt them and you let them sit for a little while. And if you're working with the baby ones, what we did was we cut them in half and we did peel a little bit of the skin so you don't have so much skin in each of your bites. What I also really love about this recipe is that you don't have to fry your eggplants. This is like a roasting broiling. So if you're working with the slices of eggplant from the globe eggplant, you broil them, you put a little bit of oil on them, you stick them under the broiler, and that softens them. And if you're using the baby eggplants, they're a little bit larger, so you kind of want to roast them until they start to get a little bit softer. And then, kind of to your sheet pan lasagna recipe, what I love about this is you can make your own marinara, you can make it fancy, or you can just use a jar of Rayo's. And there's also this recipe too where you can use, if you have really good tomatoes, you'd use slices of tomatoes too instead of a sauce. And so you take your broiled eggplant slices, you lay it out onto your sheet pan. You take slices of like juicy tomato, you add those to the sheet pan. You add layers of fresh mozzarella cheese. You stick that under the broiler, you get it broiled. Then you bake it for a little bit longer so that it gets all like hot and melty. Then you can just add some fresh basil to the top of it. You can shower it with herbs. One of the pieces that you and I discovered, and we've talked about this many times, are the garlic panko breadcrumbs. And this is a really great place for that because you have basically a tray of soft vegetables and it's nice to have something crispy on top. And so when we make panko breadcrumbs, we just take some butter, a little bit of garlic, mince the garlic or grate it on a microplane, toast your breadcrumbs until they're very toasty, and then you can top it with that. You can bake it with that. And this is really like a place where it works in the winter or it works in the summer. You can make this recipe all year long.
Yeah, I want to call it a few things because you really were the one who introduced me to this idea of how do you turn eggplant parm into something easier? Because a traditional eggplant parm, you're taking slices of eggplant, you're frying them, or you're battering and frying them even. Depends which recipe you're using. That step not only is so much more work, it's also a lot of oil. And this version is really taking just the flavors and basics of eggplant parm and saying, like, how do we do this super fast? And to your point, getting it on a sheet pan, cutting them in half or cutting them into rounds, roasting it or broiling it till soften. There's no frying. And then it's just topping. So then you're pulling the sheet pan out, you're topping it with cheese and sauce. You're pulling the sheet pan out, you're topping it maybe with some breadcrumbs. You could cook your eggplants ahead of time, have them in your fridge, and then when you have your friends come over or you want to serve dinner that night, you just put those pre-cooked, pre-softened eggplant on your sheet pan, top it with your pre-made sauce and your cheese, and then you have your little panko breadcrumbs hanging out. You compose it all. And the other piece, which is that we make this with cauliflower. Like when we didn't have eggplants, because you and I tend to eat really seasonally, we got all our produce from the farmer's market. And in the
Yeah.
spring, they didn't have eggplants. So we got little cauliflowers. You could use big ones. We just cut them all evenly into sort of 1 inch or half-inch steaks. The same idea. You add some oil, salt, and pepper. You roast them until they're softened. And then you do the whole sauce and cheese bit. And we will link to both kinds of recipes. But this is one of my go-to dishes year round. Like it is like one of my actually maybe top 10 comfort foods at this point.
I think we both love to eat vegetarian. I think there's a lot of people that are looking for vegetarian curious recipes. It's such a comfort category, right? Just like the lasagna, like a parmesan with a vegetable at the center of it. You really don't feel like you're missing a lot. It's really delicious.
Yeah, with a great Caesar salad. So, my next one is out of the Italian flavors and into sort of what we were talking about is like, how do you create a spread of things that are customizable? And one of my favorite sort of building blocks for a vegetarian meal is the flavors of shawarma. And you'll see like all kinds of vegetarian shawarmas out there. I have a recipe for eggplant shawarma. There's cauliflower shawarma. I feel like there's celery root shawarma. If you can think of a vegetable, it's been shawarmified. And shawarma really refers to several things, but in this context, we're referring to a spice blend. And I found this recipe for mushroom shawarma. And I've definitely tried mushroom shawarmas in the past, but what I loved about this recipe is it uses portobello mushrooms. So it makes
Ooh.
kind of the shawarma element really simple. So the center of your meal is going to be this mushroom shawarma, which involves making a homemade spice blend that just involves mixing spices in a bowl, things like cumin and coriander and paprika and garlic powder, things that you can really find. Usually in shawarma, you'll have a warming spice, also like an allspice or maybe a cinnamon, but it's like subtle. And then it's just coating your mushrooms with oil with the spice blend and roasting them. So this is on a sheet pan in the oven, and that's your main. And then you get to have all this fun with what do you serve with your shawarma. And I think this is where the voice of Ina comes in and says store-bought is fine because you can make this really easy and have a really fun vegetarian shawarma night. You get pitas, you just heat them up, you get some crumbled feta, you slice up some cucumbers and tomatoes and red onion. Maybe you make a salad or you keep them separate if you have picky eaters. You have some tahini sauce, perhaps. This recipe tells you to make a yogurt tahini sauce, which I
Oh, yeah.
love. I love that
Yes.
idea. And it's a very simple sauce. It's basically yogurt, tahini, lemon, garlic, super simple. So you could have a little sauce. You could buy tahini sauce if you didn't want to make it from scratch. You
Right,
could have
right.
some really good hummus on your table. So this is where you
Or even
leftovers.
leftovers from a night out where you had hummus leftover and a little bit of tahini sauce leftover. You don't even have to make them yourself.
Exactly. And then you can have some crunchy lettuce, some romaine, some iceberg. You could shred it. And then everyone can make little pockets with shawarma. And if you didn't want pita, then a big pot of rice, stick in the rice cooker or have pre-made rice that you heat up. This is just so easy to modify and then have a big spread that feels abundant. But really, the thing you cooked was just some mushrooms.
Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to highlight too, is that this is essentially just a roasted vegetable dish with a really great spice blend. I'm really glad that you kind of went into what is in shawarma spice because I did not grow up eating any kind of like really flavorful shawarma spice like that. And so I always kind of wonder what's in it.
Yeah, so the version of this recipe is a little different from mine. So he does coriander, cumin, smoked paprika, and a little
Okay.
chili powder. I do think that like sort of earthy cumin and that sort of lovely floral coriander with the smokiness of the paprika that sort of mimics a charred grill are the key things if you're making homemade shawarma.
Right.
But this is where you can start to add other things. I always add allspice. I always add garlic powder. I also add chili flake, a tiny, this isn't spicy. It's so subtle.
Right.
And
Right.
then,
It just adds flavor.
yeah. And I love adding both regular paprika, the sweetness of a regular paprika with the smokiness of a smoked paprika. I also add turmeric to mine. But if you're like, all of this is too much for me and I don't like the sound of it, like I don't want to make my homemade blend, there are so many shawarma blends on the market online. I really like the New York Shook brand shawarma spice blend if you're looking for one online.
Yeah, I just think this is such an easy way to build flavor. And I love the call out to the 80s vegetable, the portobello
Right.
mushroom. It is so meaty. And I think this is a great way to really use it, roasting it in the oven. It helps get rid of all that water. It makes it really meaty. I wanted to also throw out if you're going to reheat your pitas, once your mushrooms are done, you just throw them on top and put them back in the oven for like 4 to 5 minutes. And then you can kind of serve it that
Oh, yeah, you
way, and
could
it's
just reheat it on
exciting
the sheet pan, and then you can
on the sheet pan.
he recommends slicing the mushrooms, like, once they're
Right.
roasted, which to me makes sense because that sort of mimics a strip of meat in a way.
Or I guess, could you just also slice them before you toss
Yeah,
them in
and
oil,
then we could get it a
right?
little, like, crispier on each piece, which I probably would do.
Well, I also have a sort of Mediterranean-ish sheet pan meal. This is a really, really quick one. It's feta and chickpeas with cherry tomatoes,
Yum.
and really, it's so simple. I think in this recipe, you would probably just use chickpeas that were already cooked. This is a great place to use a few cans of chickpeas. So you take 3 cups of chickpeas, you dry them off, you toss them with cherry tomatoes. They'll sort of concentrate and blister, and you toss it with a little bit of shallot, olive oil, honey, and chili flake.
Oh,
So you sort of
honey.
have this, yeah, you sort of have this spicy, sweet. And again, if you had a great spice blend here, you could definitely add that to this recipe, but this is kind of a simple way to make it fun and exciting and just for a weeknight meal. You toss this onto a sheet pan and then you nestle in blocks of feta, like chunks of feta.
Like, cut the block into half and then into quarters or something, like, big pieces.
Yeah, like a square or a rectangle.
Okay.
So it sort of looks like you have these white bricks on your sheet pan. And there was a tip. This is a recipe. The one that we're going to include is from Ali Slagle for the New York Times. She offers a tip, which is use feta that's made from sheep's milk, not from cow's milk, because the cow's milk doesn't have enough fat to withstand roasting. I don't know that I ever see
Oh,
cow's milk feta,
interesting. I
right?
have seen cow's milk feta. I think a lot of the less expensive feta that you find in a lot of grocery stores is actually cow's milk feta. I think
Interesting.
sheep's milk feta can sometimes be a little bit of the nicer version. It's priced a little bit
Or
higher.
goat, right?
Traditionally, feta is made with sheep's milk. And so when
Yeah.
you're getting, especially like a Bulgarian feta or something from the Middle East or Turkey, those tend to be sheep's milk. I think this is a really interesting point, and I'm really glad you brought it up because that makes sense to me. Because every time I buy sheep's milk feta, I can notice that it's richer and creamier than sort of the
Yeah.
other kinds of feta that I've picked up here and there. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and I would also add too, if I had halloumi on hand, I would use a halloumi too,
Yeah.
because it would kind of get melty and crispy. I don't know that halloumi is always available for people, especially like in the small town that I grew up in, but when I find it, I usually buy it and stick it in my fridge. It lasts for a long time. And the same is true for feta too. If you get a good feta, it's in a brine
And
months.
halloumi you can freeze really easily and
Ooh.
just keep stocked in your freezer if you see a good deal. Like in the summer, Costco will sell halloumi, so you could get a big brick of it and just divvy it up.
Oh, I bet they sell it in the summer because it's a grillable
It's a
cheese,
grillable
right? That makes
cheese. I love
Yeah,
a
and
good
you can throw it in your
halloumi.
freezer.
But it's a combination of a salty cheese, sweet caramelized cherry tomatoes, and those little nutty, crispy, roasty
Crispy
chickpeas.
chickpeas.
It's a
Yeah.
great combination of flavors. And I love the idea of this of like, you could serve this with crusty bread. You could serve this with a grain like quinoa or rice or farro. And you can make, again, a sort of abundant spread. You could have a little bit of chopped raw vegetables. You could have some hot sauces on your table, fresh herbs. You could really make this sort of more fun table side.
Absolutely. I think this is a great place for pita too. You can throw the pitas on top of there. You can have a baguette. But one of the suggestions too was a salad. As this is all roasting in the oven, if you're trying to cut down on your carbs or you also are just gluten free, you could just do this with a really great salad and you would have this warm element that's crispy and briny and sweet with a really great shaved vegetable salad would be so delicious.
I love that. Yeah, so sort of in the same idea of Mediterranean flavors, I love a stuffed pepper. And
Ooh.
typically, stuffed peppers, you're kind of making in a casserole dish and often with saucy elements and like sort of steamed. And that is traditionally how I make it. But I've seen some fun like versions of sheet pan stuffed peppers that I feel like almost constitute a weeknight meal because they're less about having a super saucy pepper and more just the pepper as a flavorful vehicle for an easy stuffing. And the recipe that I want to share is just really simple. It's rice and beans, like canned beans. And I think you can add canned corn or frozen corn to this. And tomato sauce or even probably a salsa would work here. And then you're just stuffing halved bell peppers, topping it with cheese, and putting it on your sheet pan and roasting it till everything gets tender and gooey and delicious. And I just feel like this is infinitely customizable. You could do quinoa and black bean. You could do pinto bean and rice. You could do a mix of beans, red beans and pinto beans and rice. You could use leftover rice. You could make a fresh pot. You could use those packets of rice if that's what makes your life easy. You could add chili powder. You could add cumin, coriander. You could add a great like Creole spice blend. That would add tons of flavor to stuffed pepper. And then the cheeses that you like, any good melty cheese, mozzarella, a Colby Jack, a pepper jack, a cheddar. It's sort of fun and it's also one of those customizable meals.
What's really great about this idea too is besides its customization, I think if you're someone who's really dipping your toe in meatless meals, or if you're a parent and you're trying to get your kids to eat more vegetables or just take meat off of the table a couple nights a week, rice and beans is a very comforting dish that most people will eat. Even if you're bringing some of this home from a restaurant, stuffing your leftover rice and beans into a pepper, adding a little bit of cheese. I mean, any bell pepper you have is going to be beautiful. A red, a green, an orange, a yellow on a sheet pan. It just looks really appetizing and it's a fun meal.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I love the idea of using leftovers for this. It's also the kind of thing, if you make a big pot of beans, sometimes what I do is I take some of that and I stick it in my freezer in a pint-sized mason jar. And if you pull out one of those mason jars or Tupperwares, whatever you have, and you defrost your beans, you already have so much flavor that you've invested in already to just add a few more things to that. But it also is just, again, a nice way to get more fiber, more nutrients, more vegetables, and color, because you could do a mix of red and orange and yellow peppers on a sheet pan. That looks beautiful.
It looks really beautiful and impressive. Well, Sonia, I'm going to take us in a completely different direction. And this is a recipe that very much reminds me of you. It's a Eric Kim's sheet pan japchae, which he did this really great video for the New York Times. And I also think this might have come out of the pandemic when he was at home with his family and cooking with his mom.
Right, because it reminds me of his sheet pan bibimbap recipe, which we
Yes.
talked about in another sheet pan episode, and we can link again. But he explicitly in that head note says, yes, this came out of the pandemic, living at my parents' house and wanting to make something simplified. Japchae, as you know, is one of my favorite dishes, so I want to hear about this.
Eric also talks about how this is like a dish reserved for royalty and it's very labor intensive. And to your point, he's really simplified it. And even for someone like me I have very little experience with cooking Korean food, you basically are roasting vegetables on a pan. While your vegetables are roasting, you're making a very simple sauce with garlic, soy sauce, brown sugar, and a little bit of maple syrup, and then some toasted sesame seeds. And then you're just cooking noodles, which again, these are special sweet potato noodles. But if you really couldn't find them, I think just finding like a really great Asian noodle would also work here. And once your vegetables come out of the oven, you're throwing your noodles onto the tray, you're throwing your sauce onto the tray, and then you're just mixing it around. What I really like about the recipe is that he uses a mix of shiitake mushrooms, which are my favorite mushroom, sweet bell peppers, and he uses thawed frozen spinach.
Mm.
And you squeeze the water out. And what he talks about is how on the sheet pan in the oven, the spinach kind of gets a little bit crispy around the edges, almost like a toasted seaweed. And so in this video, he sort of shows how he would arrange things. He actually arranges the bell peppers around the outside and the mushrooms on the inside. I would do the opposite. I like my mushrooms to be a little bit more
Yes, me
crispy.
too.
Yeah, I like a crispy mushroom, and so you slice them very thin. You're just tossing them with a little bit of olive oil, arranging them. You want them to cook like color blocked on their own, but you can really make it look beautiful. If you wanted to do this for a party, you could roast all your vegetables ahead of time, and then you could cook off your noodle. You make your sauce, set that aside, cook off your noodles at the last minute, and toss this at the table. And I think that would be so impressive.
Yeah, I there's so much I want to speak to what you just said. I love a crispy shiitake in the oven. It's like one of my favorite things. I feel like it's so much better than even a pan-fried shiitake because it gets
Oh,
like
yes.
so crisp and bacony in a way. And I know people
Yeah.
make shiitake bacon, so that's no surprise to me. But I make japchae actually often in my home. And japchae is typically made with like a glass noodle, which is made from sweet potato starch. So it's totally gluten-free. It has very few calories. Not that that's why I'm making it, but it has a really fun, chewy, delightful texture and it cooks really fast. I think it boils in like
Yeah, it's
it's
fast.
fast. But usually when I make japchae, it is kind of like first you're sauteing greens, then you're sauteing mushrooms, then you're sauteing your carrots and your bell peppers and your scallions, and it's a whole process of sauteing and layering, and then you're adding the noodles, and then you have to toss them in a big bowl, and it can be kind of like a lot of dishes and a lot of work. These are fun simplifications, and then you get the added benefit of the sheet pan itself, and the sheet pan gives you all those textures that a saute pan doesn't achieve in the same way.
Yeah, and I think you might have mentioned this before, and this might have seen me clocking it because I really feel like I've learned a lot of Korean food from you. But, you know, japchae is great hot or cold. It's
Yes.
a great dish. It's like you can have it as a hot meal, also as a room temperature on a buffet. And also, it's great for lunch the next day at your desk.
Yeah, glass noodles loaded with vegetables in a soy-based sauce is just great, piping hot or room temperature. I wouldn't have it ice cold because the noodles change a little bit. When you have a crowd at a potluck, I love it. It's such a great dish. I'm glad that Eric Kim has shared something that makes it sort of even more accessible. And that's what the sheet pan is for. And that leads into another recipe developer that we both really love named Sarah Bond, who does strictly vegetarian meals all the time. So she has so many smart recipes. And I was thinking of a sheet pan meal I genuinely make a lot, which is a kind of veggie taco. And she had a recipe that's very similar to what I make, which is a sweet potato and black bean taco. So I love a sweet potato taco. It is not traditional. I'm not claiming this is traditional, but sometimes you just want a vehicle for roasting vegetables and having your tortillas that you probably keep in the fridge or the freezer, having some potatoes or sweet potatoes in your pantry. This sort of is like my what do I make tonight meal. And then she incorporates this can of black beans. So it's all so simple and comes together so quickly. You cube your sweet potatoes, you toss them in oil and salt and pepper, you roast them until they're almost done. And then for the last 5 minutes, you add the black beans that are drained out of the can.
It just like warms them up,
Just
right?
warms them up, crisps them up
Yeah.
without drying them out. And then while your sweet potatoes are roasting, you can kind of get together all your taco ingredients. So she has you make a really simple sauce, I think is very smart, that involves yogurt, adobo. So when you get,
And your nieces were there visiting, and you made them these sweet potato tacos. And I think I was really impressed that your nieces also really loved the sweet potato taco. But I think, again, it's like this idea that you're taking elements that are known and that are fun, like a taco, and you're filling it with these comforting ingredients like a starchier sweet potato. I mean, certainly you could do this like with a regular russet if you wanted to. You
yeah,
could do this with different spice blends, but a can of beans, like this is so easy and also so fun.
yeah. And if you want to go a next level version, of course you can make your own beans. Of course you can make your own refried beans. But there's something with the sweet potato, the sweetness that my nieces, who at the time were pretty young, like 7 and 9 or 6 and 8,
Yeah.
something like that. And yeah, they loved it. And it was easy for them to add whatever toppings they wanted or didn't want, like if they wanted cheese or they wanted sour cream, which goes back to what we started with, which is this idea of like, how can you make these fun meals that are customizable for each person, particularly if you're trying to introduce veggie beans as something new in the home. This is like an easy way to kind of have a gateway of flavors and textures and ingredients.
It can be as simple as you want it to be, or it can also be as sexy as you want it to be. But these are show-stopping dishes that are surprisingly easy to make and also vegetarian.
I'm excited to make literally every one of these.
Me too. And I'm also very hungry right now.
Me too. Until next time,
Until next time, bye.
bye.
Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.